Good evening, Lambda. I want to say I'm very happy to be back before you. Jared, thank you for the invitation. So last year in January, I took office as the elected District Attorney of Brooklyn. And when I took office, I indicated that I was going to create a task force called Justice 2020. And it actually turned out to be larger than I thought it would be. We had over 70 members of various communities involved in the formation of what I've deemed an action plan for Brooklyn. We had people, many criminal justice reform advocates. We had law enforcement, we had prosecutors, we had people from various, ethnic and racial communities and stakeholders, member of the clergy, formerly incarcerated people, academics, and it just continued to grow. Lambda was represented on the Justice 2020. Dan was a proud member of Lambda and actually got many of his ideas into the final product. But ultimately, after 6 months of meeting and working, the Justice 2020 Task Force gave me 17 recommendations about what I should be doing as the District Attorney of Brooklyn, which I've promised to try to implement as many of those, if not all of those, by 2020, giving myself about 1.5 to 2 years to get much of that going. There are 4 basic pillars of Justice 2020. The first and foremost one, and I think is the most important, is the overuse of jail and prison, of the influence of mass incarceration on our justice system. Justice 2020 speaks to what you want out of your district attorney's office. I believe that most of the people I've met throughout Brooklyn understand and believe that our criminal justice system was broken, that we incarcerated way too many people. I'm sure many of you know the stats. There's 2.2 million people in jail across the United States. In 1972 and 1973, there were like less than 350,000. It started with the war on drugs. It continued. The type of mass incarceration, obviously, it was one that impacted all communities, but really had a dramatic racial disparity, with blacks and Latinos bearing the brunt of the justice system. So I've made a commitment to do things differently in Brooklyn in the way that we use jail and incarceration. And very simply, it's to make sure that jail is the last alternative, that jail is only imposed when we don't figure out any other way that we can handle this case, and that every other opportunity should be explored and figured out. And how do we do that? Well, we look at various factors. We'll look at the nature of the crime, the harm caused. We look at who the accused is. What needs does that person have in terms of mental health, needing of social services, drug addiction services? Could we do something differently with the person? We also look at the needs of the community. Does what we do, and this is important, does it keep us safer? Or does it promote public trust? Or does it do the opposite? Does it alienate us from our communities? I've been attacked a little bit, saying that what I'm doing is going to bring back the bad old days of the 80s and 90s. It's not. We've been sold a bill of goods for a long time now that says putting people in jail as a punishment will keep us safer. It was behind the stop and frisk policies. We know by certainty that when 95% of the people who go to jail or prison return home, and they return home to the same communities they come from, sending people to jail or prison, especially our young emerging adults, young people, is the worst thing that we can do for them. They come home worse for it, not better. They're being warehoused in the interim. Our prisons are not really providing significant rehabilitative services. And also importantly, you can't provide the kind of cognitive behavioral change that is sometimes available in prison in a year and a year and a half. That's simply punishment. So when we send people to prison, we're not gaining much for it. It's the most expensive way, tax dollars, that we can handle people. It also is just inhuman, and it treats people without human dignity. So what would work? Well, I believe, and part of the Justice 2020 belief structure is that the district attorney needs to share its power back with the community and say, so we're going to be creating these neighborhood safety planning councils, and each neighborhood is going to, I'm going to listen to what the community wants in terms of what safety and justice and fairness looks like. But we also think that people who come from certain communities need to be able to get the resources in their communities and not inside of a jailhouse. And we're going to be working to build up communities. And I'm going to be fighting to make sure that resources are provided to communities to do work that keeps people out of jail and does preventative work. Our justice system should be about accountability, but accountability is not synonymous with punishment. Accountability, it means that someone accepts that they've done something wrong, they try to make amends to the best of their ability for what they've done, and then we try to make sure that they don't re-offend, do this again. So we're going to be working much closer than any district attorney's office has done with our communities to make sure that we're not needlessly putting people in jail. It also means that we're going to free up resources to focus in on the things that really matter. The drivers of violent crime. We've had a tremendous uptick in hate crimes in Brooklyn, a tremendous uptick, 80% uptick from previous years. And so, like, Justice 2020 is also about using our resources for kinds of cases that actually matter in keeping us safe. I created part of Justice 2020. It was the inclusion of a brand new hate crimes bureau. We never had that before in Brooklyn. A bureau that's meant to protect people from these vicious hate crimes, whether it's LGBTQ or it's, anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish, or anti-Semitic. This bureau is the first of its kind. In this way, there's over 6 seasoned prosecutors, 2 junior prosecutors, investigators, paralegals, that we can do this work much better and much more efficiently. It's meant to bring culturally sensitive prosecution and services to victims, because I think you've all heard that there are issues in various communities. It acknowledges that certain communities have been underserved, especially Black and brown transgender victims. We know that they've been underserved by our justice system. When an incident happens, they're not taken as seriously, and when they're arrested, the system seems unduly harsh, needlessly. So we're working on things like that, and Dan was incredibly important in making sure that Justice 2020 does not simply mean that we're not going to take cases seriously, but it's actually directing us towards the type of cases that need to be prosecuted forcefully, and that we're mindful of that. The other part of Justice 2020 that I think is very significant is that it's not about individual tinkering with certain reforms, right? You all know that I've made a lot of different reforms in the last year. We have a 98% reduction in the number of marijuana cases that Brooklyn prosecutes. I only basically prosecute marijuana now if someone is driving and smoking at the same time, because I think that's a public safety issue. I've changed our bail policy in Brooklyn, where 95% of people charged with a misdemeanor are released without any bail. We've changed various things. Because of that change in policy, something remarkable happened. In the year and a half, the year I've been a DA and the year that I was the acting DA, we have 58% fewer new admissions to Rikers Island on misdemeanor cases from Brooklyn. 58%. So we're talking, I've changed the way we handle our drug cases. You don't have to plead guilty to get drug services anymore. In fact, we have Brooklyn Clear, which means that instead of when someone gets arrested, they don't have to go to central booking anymore. They don't have to spend 20 hours or 24 hours at central booking to see a judge, and then maybe go to Rikers in order to get treatment. They can get treatment right from the precinct. So we work with a service provider. The service provider will go down to the precinct day or night to make sure that this person it's a peer counselor, and they'll say the DA does not want to prosecute this case. He's giving us 7 days to get you into services. Usually there'll be drug services, but there are all other kind of services people need. It's a harm reduction model. And at the end of the time they get into the program, they just have to substantially participate in the program. And after 30 days, if they're going, I just dismiss the case. So they never come to court. But in the interim, we're doing a lot of things to prevent overdoses and to be safe. And it really speaks to my upbringing coming out of East New York, when I saw generations of young Black and Hispanic men really have their lives ruined because they got arrested, they got criminalized on low-level possession cases or low-level sale cases, and they lost opportunities for education and housing and employment. And what we know about, and this is why I say we have to push back against this narrative that jail keeps us safe. It does not keep us safe, because the things that we know that keep us safe and what makes people kind of move away from, antisocial conduct and behavior are people who, the highest thing is educational attainment, but there's also employment, and then this sense of a close social tie to a spouse, a partner, someone that you can love. And when we take people in jail, we rip them away from all the things that actually keep them safe. And we have 1,500 people coming home every year from upstate prisons. A majority are homeless. And all the other collateral consequences. I created my immigration policy, first DA maybe in the country to have the immigration policy, but I hired immigration attorneys to prevent the collateral consequences for non-citizens who come in contact with our judicial system, and to make sure that they're not unfairly deported. To be real clear on what that policy is, we work to make sure that people are treated with human respect and dignity, and because someone gets arrested on a low-level offense doesn't mean they're going to get deported from our country. So there's been a lot of change in Brooklyn, and the final piece to Justice 2020, I think, is the transparency. So we continue to do conviction review, we're continuing to do a lot of things, but there's a bigger transparency. I published reports now, I'm putting out data that didn't exist before so people can actually see the differences. In the office in the year 15 months now that I've been the elected DA. And I intend to do a lot more. And so in the next few days, I'll give you a glimpse. I'm not going to get into everything, but I'm going to be announcing a post-conviction justice bureau. Senator Myrie knows that I'm a big supporter of ending mass supervision. Mass supervision, I don't know if you spoke about it before I got here, but mass supervision is, there are 36,000 people, maybe more than that, in New York State who are either on probation or parole. It's an incredible number. The majority do not need to be on supervision. And here's something that's really shocking that many of you would not know necessarily unless you follow this, is that most of those people when they get returned to prison, it's not because they committed a new crime. It's because of some technical violation. And so they're cycled in and out of the justice system. And really, it's because their parole officers are overworked and don't have the services to provide them. So the easiest way for a parole officer to say, you're slipping, you're testing positive for marijuana, you're testing for alcohol, is I'm going to violate you and put you back into jail. So we have to end that practice. I've been forceful in trying to end that, and I'm going to take some concrete steps on my end by not asking for post-release supervision on categories of cases or asking for the minimum when I have to ask for it, but I have discretion on the number, and doing similarly situated things on probation. But I'm going to be doing more than that. I've started, I know some of you know this, that I've been going to jails and prisons and meeting with people who are getting ready for reentry, and saying that my office is going to assist people who are in jail in getting released on parole. There's so many people who are not released on parole, although the prisons will tell you they're ready to be released. So this is not endangering public safety. These are people who the prisons have said have made the cognitive behavioral changes necessary to safely return home. The prisons are saying they're ready to be released, and yet the parole board is not allowing them out. And part of that is because the parole board and the process by which this happens is amazing. A person who's been in jail for 15 years gets a 15-minute, maybe 10-minute teleprompter interview. It's not in person. There's only one person out of the 3 parole board members who've even read their file. It's not a fair process. It's not an intelligent process. And because of that, we have such a small percentage of people who get released when they're ready to be released. So we're going to be doing a lot more to end mass supervision. And because I'm doing more on the front end, we'll have less people in jail as well on that. So I really think that we're moving in the right directions in terms of criminal justice reform. And I'm excited about what we see in the city. We're seeing a city that has proven, and I remember when I first started to run, I was running a little bit against the narrative of the police department that says, you know, if you're not enforcing stop and frisk, we're gonna have more violence. Last year was the safest year in recorded history in Brooklyn. It just simply was. So we can push back on that narrative, and I ask you, Lambda, to support me on this, because when I release my parole recommendations, I know I'm going to get hit on this, but it is these changes, I believe, will keep us safer. We have to make our communities stronger and healthier. And that's what we're going to be doing by a lot of these reforms. And a lot of these reforms have already started, you know. And so I've just been very active in this area. You know, I'm in favor of providing immigrants and not undocumented people with driver's license. People ask me, well, why would you do that, DA? And I say, because it actually keeps us safe, right? Because they have to take the test. They have to get road tested. They're allowed now to actually get a license and get insurance. So if they get into the car accident, they're insured. And guess what? If they get into an accident, they don't have to flee and run because they're afraid that they're going to get arrested and then deported. It keeps us safer, right? And so these are the things that I'm working on behalf of the community. In terms of, you know, LGBT violence, I am very firmly committed to making sure that anyone who hurts a person because of who they love, how they look, will be severely dealt with in my office. I believe in that everyone deserves to have their case with a punishment that's suitable to what they've done, but this and hate crimes are, in a way, a very special category of cases. And I'm going to say that we've really actually had a tremendous uptick in anti-Semitic hate crimes in parts of Brooklyn. Shockingly, my neighborhood where I live now in Williamsburg and Crown Heights, those attacks make people afraid to walk down the street. They impact humans in ways, they impact all of us in ways that it's different, because when someone is robbed, they go through a lot of trauma, there's a lot of fear, but the another person may not really believe that they're going to be the next victim. I wasn't going to be in that neighborhood. I wasn't going to be out that late. Whatever the reasons were. That people, they may have empathy for the person who was robbed, but it doesn't cause that level of fear. When you hear that someone was shot, you're probably not thinking that you're going to be the next person shot for various reasons. But these hate crimes have a way of making entire communities fearful that the only reason someone was attacked is because of who they are. And I think because they have such widespread consequences that they do and deserve enhanced punishment. So while I am, a believer that it's about accountability and not simply punishment, I also understand that we need to have very firm resolve in how we deal with hate in our city. And so to the next time, I look forward to coming back and answering any of your questions. Thank you.
What's your office's current and future thinking on consensual prostitution and prosecuting those crimes?
So I believe in decriminalization. I'm actually interested to hear a little bit about the work towards legalization, whether that makes sense. I'm interested in hearing. I know that some of the women advocacy groups are against that. But I look at what we currently do in my office. We have, I would call it a soft prosecution. So if someone gets arrested, they go through, usually it's a desk appearance ticket. It's not someone going through the system, but occasionally someone will go through the system. And then they go to AP8, which is a human trafficking part, and I guess they're screened for services. And the services are like BJI or some women organizations will do services, and after the services are completed, I dismiss the case. There are ACDs. There's no prosecution. No one goes to jail on the cases out of Brooklyn. The question really is, could we handle that the way we handled Brooklyn Clear? Remember, Brooklyn Clear is no court, right? Brooklyn Clear is getting services to people before they ever have to come to court. And I think there's a model in which we can do that in Brooklyn. We can still screen for trafficking, which is obviously a big issue, and it's, I think, why many of the women organizations are against legalization, because there is real trafficking. But I think you can screen for that in ways that have nothing to do with criminalization. So, but I'm interested actually on hearing more. It's one of the things that, I'm very proud of as, my approach is that I'm willing to listen to good ideas. And it's funny, Senator and I are pretty much on page and most of, on this. When I supported marijuana legalization, I might have only been the second DA to do it. I think Cy came out before me on that issue, but I came out saying, we can do it, but only if we have expungements. Because we have over 20,000 people in Brooklyn alone who are walking around with a misdemeanor conviction for marijuana, although in the 70s, we allegedly decriminalized marijuana. Over 92% in Brooklyn were black and brown people, right? The racial disparities were clear. And I'd have the first program in the state that allows people to go back and try to get those expunged. Right, so I'm doing that, bit by bit, but we need much stronger. First of all, we need a much more effective sealing law than we have, and we need an expungement law as well.
Jared. A few months ago, there was an article in The Appeal about a trans couple in Brooklyn that was arrested after defending themselves from a physical attack. After they were arrested, they had orders of protection issued against them, which cost them to lose their jobs. These orders of protection are not, this wasn't an isolated incident. It does happen to a lot of trans folks and LGBTQ folks in general. Now, because there was this order of protection, they didn't lose their jobs, they were excluded from going to certain places. LID and a couple other groups did meet with your office to talk about this issue of LGBTQ identified folks having orders of protection issued against them, even when they're protecting themselves. So, sorry, this is the most long-winded question ever, but so my question is, and it's the same question that we asked your office at that time, was, are there any procedures that your office has or that you'd be willing to put into place in your office to make sure that orders of protection that are improperly imposed against LGBTQ people, but anyone, that those orders of protection can be vacated before the 90-day statutory period when the case be dismissed?
It's a great question. Many of these policies emerged out of how the office historically has handled our domestic violence cases. On cases that involve assaults, there's an automatic imposition of an order of protection that happens at the arraignment, and there's not really a lot of critical thinking about whether or not that order of protection makes sense. And on every assault case, when there's an arrest, there's an automatic imposition of an order of protection. And so what your question really speaks to is, yes, there's been a tremendous impact on the LGBT community, but there's also been, from my perspective, and really in domestic violence cases and all assault cases, there's been the overutilization of orders of protection in general. We need to do a better job in understanding how to use those orders of protection. Now, there's some good news to this, because the criminal justice reform that we have now coming from Albany doesn't go into effect until January of 2019. I'm going to try to speed it up here in Brooklyn and do a lot of the things. Like the senator says, a lot of the things in that bill my office is already doing, but we're going to try to really implement a lot of these things. But that automatic imposition of an order of protection will not happen now, because these cases will be DATs. And they won't just happen at the criminal court arraignment automatically, as just as a policy of the office and really of the court's house. Because now the desk appearance tickets will give us time to evaluate these cases before they come to court. And quite frankly, just to make it clear, what happens at arraignments is an assistant district attorney will stand up on the case, may spend all of 2 or 3 minutes with it, and has to make a call about whether or not an order of protection should be imposed. And really the default position has always been to ask for it. Now that we don't have that system anymore, now that the overwhelming majority of misdemeanors now will be desk appearance tickets, there's no consideration of bail. We'll have time to evaluate, make phone calls, speak to witnesses, and actually get to the underlying issues about who started this incident. Is an order of protection necessary? So we are going to be changing our practice, but I just wanted to put a more global picture on it, because yes, it's been an issue in communities, but in the gay community, it's been an issue, but it's been really an issue for me in understanding the use of orders of protection, because they not only do they prevent people maybe from going to work, like in that particular case, but they prevent people from living in certain buildings and houses and things, dealing with their children. So we really need to understand that it's an incredible power that having a judge issue one of those, and we need to really think about, and I don't think anyone's really talking about this so much, but we really need to really figure out not having those imposed routinely and only as necessary.
One more. And then we just one of more, I guess these are more comments than questions. First of all,
Sir, I have to ask you just to keep it to questions, or else we just have to move on. I'm really sorry about that.
all right. Why do you assume that anybody that you arrest for sex work needs services and needs to leave the profession? That's sort of one of the gut questions around.
Sure. I make no claims on that. This is what I'm saying. I'm actually looking to listen to what I said. I said the current practice is that it's a soft prosecution, that no one is convicted of any crime. There's no jail. They get services. That's what it was. The initial creation, like most problem-solving courts, was we had drug courts, which I've gotten rid of. The idea was to get to the underlying issue of whether or not someone is being used and being trafficked. And Albany just passed a great new bill, actually, which I think makes it easier and less necessary, actually, to put these cases through the system, which is if someone is over 21 and they're, prostituting a person under 16 or 18, is it? Is 16, right? 16 and under, that it's automatic. We no longer have to show force. And so that will be a way of protecting people without having to show that this person, they're a minor. It's very strict liability. If you're prostituting a minor, that's a crime. And I think we can all live with that. But that's really what the heart, I think that's really what the heart of this was that there was a look to try to see whether or not the people who were coming through the system were really, sex workers, and this was their occupation, and this was voluntary, or was this, either labor traffic or sex traffic.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.